Welcome back, everyone, to the Unseen Wisdom, where we really dig deep to uncover those fascinating connections that often go unnoticed. If you like what we're doing here, please hit that like button, leave us a comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future episodes.
We appreciate it.
So today we're taking you on a journey to the heart of Africa, to untangle the complex and often hidden truth about the ongoing conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC, as it's often called.
Right.
We're talking about escalating violence, accusations against the tech giant Apple, and the involvement of other African nations like Rwanda and South Africa. So it's a story that's making headlines all over the place, but as we dig deeper, you'll see there's much more to it than meets the eye.
Yeah, it's like peeling back the layers of an onion, really revealing a web of interconnected interests and motivations that often get lost in the simplified narratives that we see in the news and on Gadunga.
Okay, so let's start with what's happening right now.
Okay.
We're seeing reports of the M23 rebel group seizing control of Goma, a major city in eastern DRC. And the situation seems pretty dire, with casualties, widespread displacement, and essential services disrupted.
Yeah.
So it paints a very grim picture.
It's crucial to understand, I think, that the M23, they didn't just appear out of thin air. This rebellion has deep roots going back to a 2009 peace agreement between the Congolese government and another armed group, the National Congress for the Defense of the People, or CNDP.
CNDP.
And this agreement, while intended to bring stability, ultimately sowed the seeds for the current conflict.
Oh, that's really interesting because it suggests that this current violence isn't simply a random outbreak. It's more of a symptom of these deeper unresolved issues.
Precisely.
Okay.
And that's where things start to get really fascinating, because into this already volatile mix comes Apple, facing a criminal lawsuit filed by the DRC in both France and Belgium.
Now, this lawsuit is making waves because it alleges that Apple knowingly used conflict minerals sourced from illegal mining operations in the DRC. And for a company that prides itself on ethical sourcing, this is a pretty significant accusation.
Yeah, this lawsuit gets to the heart of the unseen forces that drive these conflicts. While we often hear about rebel groups and government forces, the real story often lies in the demand for resources, particularly these conflict minerals, and the lengths to which powerful entities will go to secure them.
So let's break that down a bit. What exactly are these conflict minerals and why are they so central to this conflict?
We're talking about minerals that are essential for manufacturing our everyday electronics: tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold. They're often referred to as 3TG.
3TG.
The DRC unfortunately holds vast reserves of these minerals, but the problem is that the mining industry there is often characterized by violence, exploitation, and human rights abuses.
And the DRC is arguing that Apple is, in a sense, complicit in this system by not ensuring that their supply chains are free from these tainted minerals. It's like saying that by turning a blind eye to the source of these materials, they're indirectly profiting from the suffering of the Congolese people.
Exactly. And this isn't just a theoretical argument either. In 2022, mining giant Glencore reached a financial settlement with the DRC for similar allegations. So this case sets a precedent that makes Apple's current legal battle all the more significant.
Yeah. It's almost like we as consumers are caught in the middle. We love our shiny new gadgets.
Right.
But we rarely stop to think about the human cost behind them, the unseen consequences of our demand for the latest and greatest technology.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. The DRC conflict really highlights the interconnected nature of our world. Our choices as consumers in one part of the globe can have a real impact on the lives of people in another.
But it's not just about individual consumers, right? We're seeing other countries like Rwanda and South Africa getting pulled into this conflict as well. And their involvement raises a lot of questions. Are they trying to help stabilize the region, or are they more interested in the DRC's vast mineral wealth?
That's where the story gets even more complex. There are reports of Rwanda actively supporting the M23 rebels,
Right.
providing them with weapons and soldiers.
Wow.
This alleged involvement has drawn international condemnation, of course.
Right.
But Rwanda vehemently denies these accusations.
So it's a bit of a he said, she said situation, and it's hard to know who to believe. And then you have South Africa, which has deployed troops to the DRC, ostensibly as part of a peacekeeping mission. However, some suspect their motives might have more to do with protecting their own economic interests in the region.
Right.
Right.
It's crucial to view these actions within the broader context of regional power dynamics and competition for resources. These countries, while appearing to play the role of peacemakers, might also be pursuing their own strategic and economic objectives.
Okay, so we have multiple nations involved, rebel groups fighting for control, and corporations like Apple facing serious accusations. It's a tangled web.
Yeah.
And at the center of it all are the people of the DRC caught in a seemingly endless cycle of violence and exploitation.
And that's what we need to remember. While we analyze the geopolitical maneuvering and the corporate interests, it's the human cost of this conflict that is paramount. We're talking about families displaced from their homes, children forced to work in dangerous mining conditions, and communities terrorized by armed groups.
It's heartbreaking, and it raises a fundamental question. Is focusing on individual nations or rebel groups obscuring a larger systemic issue of corporate exploitation and resource extraction in Africa?
Right.
Are we perhaps looking at the symptoms rather than the root cause of the problem?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's a question that deserves further exploration. Absolutely.
But before we dive deeper into that, I think it's important to examine how this story is being presented in the media. We have outlets like the BBC, CNN, and The Guardian reporting on Rwanda's alleged involvement while simultaneously giving a platform to their denials. It makes you wonder, are we getting the full picture, or are these outlets pushing their own agendas?
It's a valid question. Media narratives, even from seemingly reputable sources, can be shaped by various factors, including political biases, economic interests, and access to information. So it's important to be critical consumers of information, to compare different sources, and to consider the potential motivations behind the narratives being presented.
That's a great point. We can't just passively absorb information. We need to actively engage with it, question it, and seek out multiple perspectives. And speaking of different perspectives, let's turn our attention to the statements coming from the leaders of Rwanda and the DRC. They're not mincing words, and their pronouncements are only adding fuel to the fire.
Right. Both presidents have been incredibly vocal about their positions, and it's clear that tensions are running high.
These pronouncements, while seemingly straightforward, can be incredibly nuanced.
Right.
And often carry hidden meanings or veiled threats.
So it's not just about what they're saying, but how they're saying it. Their choice of words, their tone, the timing of their statements, all of these factors can play a significant role in shaping the narrative and influencing the trajectory of the conflict. It's like a high-stakes game of chess where every move has consequences.
And the stakes are incredibly high. We're talking about the potential for further escalation, regional instability, and even more suffering for the Congolese people.
It's a sobering thought. And it underscores the urgency of understanding this complex web of interests and motivations at play in this conflict.
I couldn't agree more. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the complexity.
Yeah.
But by breaking it down, by examining the unseen connections, we can start to make sense of this seemingly intractable situation. Well said. We've covered a lot of ground here, but it feels like we're just scratching the surface of this incredibly complex situation. We've seen how the conflict in the DRC is about much more than just rebel groups and government forces. It's a story of corporate greed, international power dynamics, and the exploitation of a nation's resources. And it's a story that's still being written.
And it's a story that we all have a role in shaping. By understanding the unseen connections, by demanding transparency and ethical practices from the companies we support, and by amplifying the voices of those who are often silenced, we can begin to shift the narrative and create a more just and equitable world.
I completely agree. This has been a truly eye-opening deep dive. And I hope our listeners are starting to see the DRC conflict in a new light. We've got a lot more to unpack, including the potential role of conscious consumerism in demanding ethical sourcing practices from tech companies, particularly Apple. But for now, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll delve even deeper into the human cost of this conflict and explore what you, as an informed and engaged listener, can do to make a difference. We'll be right back. And we're back continuing our deep dive into the heart of the DRC conflict. You know, it's easy to get lost in the geopolitical maneuvering and the complexities of global supply chains, but I think it's crucial for us to remember the human beings at the heart of this story.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. We're talking about real people whose lives are being torn apart by this violence. Families displaced children, forced to work in dangerous mines, communities terrorized by armed groups. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the sheer scale of suffering. Yeah, and to feel powerless, too, in the face of such immense suffering. But what if I told you our choices matter? What if I told you that we have more power than we realize to influence the course of events?
Okay, I'm listening. How can we, sitting here, possibly make a difference in a conflict that's happening thousands of miles away?
It starts with awareness, with connecting the dots between our everyday lives and the unseen consequences of our actions. You know, by understanding the forces at play, by seeing the connections between our consumption habits and the conflicts that fuel them, we can start to make more informed choices.
So you're talking about conscious consumerism, like being more mindful of where our products come from and the companies that we choose to support.
Precisely. Take Apple, for example. They've faced criticism for their lack of transparency in their supply chains. By choosing to buy from companies that prioritize ethical sourcing, that are actively working to ensure their products are not contributing to conflict and human rights abuses, we send a powerful message.
Right? It's like we're voting with our wallets. We're telling these companies that we're not just looking for the latest and greatest gadget. We also care about the human cost behind it. But is that enough? Can individual consumer choices really make a difference on a global scale?
While individual actions are important, it's the collective impact that truly drives change. Imagine millions of consumers demanding ethical sourcing, holding corporations accountable for their actions. That's a force to be reckoned with.
It's like a ripple effect, right? One small action can create a wave that spreads far and wide. But let's be realistic. Not everyone is going to become a conscious consumer overnight. There are systemic issues at play here that require more than individual action.
You're absolutely right. We can't place the entire burden on consumers. We need to look at the bigger picture, at the role of governments and international organizations in addressing the root causes of conflict.
So what can we do beyond our individual choices? How can we influence those larger systems?
We can use our voices to demand more from our governments and international organizations. We can write to our representatives, support organizations working for peace and human rights in the DRC, spread awareness on social media. These actions might seem small, but they can contribute to creating real change.
It's like that saying, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world indeed. It's the only thing that ever has.
Exactly. And remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It's a long and often difficult process. But every action we take, no matter how small, can have a ripple effect.
I love that analogy. It's like throwing a pebble into a pond. The ripples might seem insignificant at first, but they can eventually reach the farthest shores.
Yeah.
You know, when I think about the people in the DRC struggling to survive amidst this conflict, it makes me reflect on my own life, my own priorities. It's so easy to get caught up in our own little bubbles and forget about the interconnectedness of our world.
That's a very insightful observation. And it speaks to the importance of empathy, of connecting with the human stories behind the headlines. We can't just analyze this conflict from a detached intellectual perspective. We need to feel it to understand the human cost, to let it move us to action.
You're right. It's not enough to simply know about the conflict in the DRC. We need to let that knowledge transform us, to let it guide our choices and our actions. But I have to admit, it can be overwhelming to think about all the problems in the world, all the conflicts and injustices happening every day. It's easy to feel like our efforts are just a drop in the ocean.
I understand that feeling. But think about it this way. Even a single drop of water is essential to the ocean's vastness. Every action we take, no matter how small, contributes to the larger movement for a more just and peaceful world. And sometimes that one drop is all it takes to inspire another and another until we have a tidal wave of change.
That's a powerful image. So if someone is listening to this right now and feeling inspired to make a difference, what would you say is the first step?
The first step is to educate ourselves. Read articles, watch documentaries, listen to podcasts like this one, and learn as much as you can about the DRC conflict and the issues surrounding conflict minerals.
The more we know, the more empowered we are to make informed choices and take effective action. Knowledge truly is power.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to share what you learn with others. Talk to your friends and family, post on social media, or write to your elected officials. The more people who are aware of this issue, the more pressure we can put on corporations and governments to do the right thing.
So knowledge is power, and sharing that knowledge is how we create real change. But what about those who say that focusing on consumer choices lets corporations off the hook too easily? That it places too much responsibility on individuals and not enough on those in power?
That's a valid point, and it's a debate worth having. Consumer choices are only one piece of the puzzle. We need to hold corporations accountable through legislation, regulation, and international agreements. But consumer pressure can be a powerful catalyst for change. It sends a clear signal to corporations that we're not willing to tolerate unethical practices.
So it's not an either-or situation. It's about using all the tools at our disposal to create a more just and equitable system.
Exactly. It's a multifaceted approach that requires collaboration and commitment from all stakeholders.
This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. I feel like I've learned so much about the DRC conflict and the unseen connections that link it to our everyday lives.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to uncover, so many more layers to this story. But I think the most important takeaway is that we're not powerless. we can make a difference even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges.
And it starts with asking questions, seeking understanding, and taking action.
That's a perfect note to transition into the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore some potential solutions and delve deeper into the nuances of this conflict.
Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll continue our journey toward uncovering the unseen wisdom. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the conflict in the DRC. We've talked about the rebel groups, the accusations against Apple, the involvement of neighboring countries. But it feels like there's still so much to unravel. It's like we've been looking at all the individual pieces of a puzzle, but we're still trying to figure out how they all fit together.
What's crucial to remember is that the situation in the DRC is a microcosm of a much larger global dynamic. We see this pattern repeating itself all over the world. Resource-rich countries exploited by powerful corporations and caught in the crossfire of international power struggles. It's a story as old as time, but it's playing out with a new intensity in the 21st century.
It's almost like a modern-day colonialism, isn't it? Except instead of outright military occupation, it's more insidious. It's about economic control, manipulating political systems, and profiting from instability. Makes you question who really holds the power in these situations.
That's a very astute observation, and it highlights the importance of looking beyond the surface, understanding the historical context, and the systemic forces that perpetuate these cycles of exploitation and conflict. We can't address the current situation without acknowledging the deep-rooted legacies of colonialism and the ongoing power imbalances in the global economy.
So where do we go from here? Is there any hope for the DRC? Can they break free from the seemingly endless cycle of violence and exploitation? I want to be optimistic, but it's hard to see a clear path forward.
I believe there's always hope, but it requires a fundamental shift in our thinking, both individually and collectively. We need to move beyond the mindset of extraction and domination and embrace a more sustainable and equitable approach to global development. It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of our world and understanding that our actions have consequences both near and far.
So what would that look like in practice? Are we talking about boycotting companies like Apple? Or completely disengaging from countries like the DRC? I struggle with these sorts of questions because they feel so absolute. And the world is anything but.
It's not about isolation or punishment. It's about demanding transparency, accountability, and ethical practices from the corporations and governments involved. It's about supporting initiatives that empower local communities, promote sustainable development, and foster peace and reconciliation. We need to move away from simplistic solutions and embrace the complexity of the challenge.
So instead of just saying no to products from the DRC, we should be asking, how can we ensure that these products are sourced ethically and that the profits benefit the Congolese people? It's about being part of the solution, not perpetuating the problem.
Exactly. It's about shifting the focus from extraction to collaboration, from exploitation to empowerment. And it requires a commitment from all stakeholders, corporations, governments, consumers, and civil society. It's a collective effort that demands we all step up and play our part.
It sounds like a tall order, but I believe it's a necessary one if we're serious about creating a more just and sustainable world. It's easy to get discouraged, but I keep coming back to this idea that we all have a role to play, that our choices matter.
I completely agree. And it's important to remember that even small actions can have a significant impact. As consumers, we have the power to choose products from companies that prioritize ethical sourcing. We can support organizations working to promote peace and development in the DRC, and we can use our voices to advocate for policies that hold corporations accountable for their actions. Every action, no matter how small, contributes to the larger movement for change.
So it's about being informed, making conscious choices, and using our voices to amplify the voices of those who are often silenced. It's about recognizing that we're not just passive observers. We're active participants in shaping the world around us.
Precisely. And it's about recognizing that we're all interconnected. What happens in the DRC affects us all, just as our choices and actions can have an impact on the lives of people thousands of miles away. We're all part of this intricate web of life, and our actions have ripple effects that extend far beyond our immediate surroundings.
You know, this deep dive has been a real wake-up call for me. I'm starting to see the world in a whole new light, recognizing the unseen connections and understanding the power we have to make a difference. It's been challenging at times, heartbreaking, but ultimately empowering.
That's the beauty of knowledge and critical thinking. It opens our eyes to new perspectives and empowers us to take action. And that's what we hope this deep dive has done for you, our listeners.
Well said. This has been an incredible conversation, and I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to learn more and get involved. The DRC conflict is just one example of the many complex challenges facing our world today. But it's a powerful reminder that we're not powerless. We can make a difference.
I hope so too. The future of the DRC, and indeed the world, depends on our collective willingness to challenge the status quo, demand better, and work together to create a more just and sustainable future.
We've covered a lot of ground today, but I think the most important takeaway is that we're not powerless. We can make a difference even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. And it starts with asking questions, seeking understanding, and taking action. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the unseen wisdom. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.